Yeah, so guys, good morning to everybody. My name is Akinwale Lamide. So this morning we will be discussing Cold War, and we'll be discussing some things about the Cold War. We'll be reminding ourselves how the Cold War started. We'll be discussing about the origin of Cold War, the struggle between the superpowers that were involved in the Cold War, and also we'll discuss about how the war also ended. So let's get started. As we all know that the Second World War ended in 1945 following the surrender of Japan, and that's the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and every other thing that actually happened that led to the end of World War II. Immediately after the Cold War started. So we can say that the Cold War can be viewed as a rivalry and ideological war between the United States and the Soviet Union, including their allies. So it's a war, a rivalry war, an ideological war between these two superpower countries, the United States and Soviet Union. And also it is also a war that was waged on political, economic, and had only limited discourse of weapons. Limited recourse of weapons among these two warring nations. So it is a war. It is not the kind of war that happened during the Second World War, whereby there was a direct attack, or let me say it's not a confrontational war that happened just like what we have in the Second World War. It's more or less like an ideological war. So according to George Orwell, in his article that he published in 1945, he predicted that it will be a nuclear stalemate between two or more monstrous super states, which possess a weapon by which millions of people can be wiped out in a few seconds. Now, this is the kind of war that actually involves two superpower countries having a nuclear weapon. A country that has countries that has nuclear weapon, so and can wipe out human race. So there is this fear between these two countries, in order not to start, the fear of retaliation from the other party of the countries that are possessing this nuclear weapon. So now let's go to the origin of Cold War. How can we say about the origin of Cold War? As I said earlier, that the Cold War started immediately after the Second World War, following the surrender of Germany and the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which brought an end to the Second World War. So things began to change. There was an development or increase there was increase in the creation of an atomic weapon. So there was also an uneasy wartime alliance between the United States and Great Britain, and on the other hand, and also the Soviet Union on the other hand. There was this alliance between the United States and Great Britain and also the Soviet Union facing each other. So by 1948, the Soviet Union has actually installed a lifetime government in their countries, most especially the Eastern Europe countries. They installed a lifetime government in their countries that were liberated by the Red Army. So Soviet Union has actually expanded. It has annexed the Eastern country Europe under him. And so the American and the British fear the government of the Soviet Union. They fear the domination of the Soviet Union at the Eastern Europe, and the threat of Soviet communist influence of coming to power in the democratic states of the Western Europe. And also, the other time we were making an explanation as regards this Cold War, we said it's a political and economic war. So during this time, the Soviet Union were spreading communism. They were spreading communism. They were spreading the ideology of communism to other eastern part of Europe, while United States were standing on their own democratic system. were standing on their own capitalist system during that time in Western Europe, at most in Western Europe. So the Soviet Union, on the other hand, were determined to maintain and control the Eastern Europe in order to safeguard against any possible threat of Germany. And also, they were intent on spreading communism worldwide, largely for ideological reasons. So that was the target of the Soviet Union during that time. They stood on their stand on spreading communism to the other parts of Europe. They stood on their stand to spread this ideology to the other parts. And they were also protecting their allies. They were also protecting their countries from another threat that might come out from Germany. So let's get into the struggles between the superpower countries. What were the things that actually happened and what are the things that later came up between the superpower countries? Now, the Cold War reached its peak between 1948 to 1953. By this period, the Soviets unsuccessfully blockaded the western air sectors of West Berlin. By 1948, the war has gotten to its peak. The war has actually gone beyond there was a blockade system that actually came up. So there's one thing that is actually used in the international system, and especially when war is going on between some particular state, that is the blockade system. I know we are familiar with that thing, the blockade system. So they block them economically in order to stop the movement of trade the movement of trade between other countries, or especially countries that they know that can help them when it comes to war distancing. Also, in order to actually prevent or to actually reduce the much moves of the Soviet Union, the United States and its European allies formed the North Atlantic Treaty Organization that we know as NATO. They formed the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. This is a unified military command to resist the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union presence in Europe in 1949. Let me take that again. In order to resist the Soviet Union command by the United States, they formed a military command known as NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization. So they formed this, and they brought all their allies, all their European allies, both US and all European allies. They came on board under this organization. The Soviet Union exploded their first atomic warhead in 1949. This ended the American monopoly on the atomic bomb. Now, by 1949, the Soviet Union had actually developed our own nuclear weapon, and it was able to test it, which was successful by 1949, removing America from being the only country that possesses the atomic weapon. So, and also in 1949, the Chinese communists has also gotten to power in the mainland of China, and also the Soviet Union also supported the communist party, or let me say the communist government of North Korea, and which during the 1953 war, or the 1950 war of North Korea and South Korea, while the United States supported the South Korea. So these were the incidents that happened during the Cold War. Don't forget, I told you that the war was not a confrontational war that existed between these two parties, between the United States and the Soviet Union. It actually existed between their allies. It was the war that existed between. So these superpower countries were actually were giving arms, they were giving support to their allies, just like what happened in 1950 now between South Korea and North Korea. The Soviet Union was giving support to North Korea based on the fact that based on their ideological alliance. Let me use that word, based on the ideological alliance. While the United States were giving support to South Korea, and the war lasted not until 1953. So by 1953, the Cold War tensions has relaxed largely owing to the death of the long-time dictator of Russia, which was Mr. Stalin in 1953. Nevertheless, the Soviet Union maintained their steeze. By doing so, a unified military organization among the Soviet bloc countries was created, which was known as the Warsaw Pact in 1955. Now, by 1955, the Soviet Union, following the death of Mr. Stalin, they came together and they formed a unified military command, just like America and the European allies did the other time that they formed NATO. So also the Soviet Union did, and they formed a unified military organization, which was known as the Warsaw Pact in 1955, and West Germany was admitted into NATO that same year. The US and the Soviet Union began developing an intercontinental ballistic missile, and in 1962 the Soviet Union began installing missiles in Cuba that could be used to launch a nuclear attack on US cities. Now, by 1962, both parties were actually creating an intercontinental ballistic missile for the war, which could be used to attack each other cities at this time. Now, Russia was storing their intercontinental ballistic missile in Cuba in order to use it as a means to attack the United States cities during this time. So, now, this sparked the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, a confrontation that brought the two superpower countries to the brink of war before agreement was reached to withdraw the missile. Now, by doing this, it was like preaching, or let me say, it was like preaching a confrontational attack to US by storing a ballistic missile in Cuba. So, it almost brought these two parties, these two superpower countries, into a brink of war before an agreement was signed and we were asked to withdraw this missile. So by October 7, 1963, President John F. Kennedy signed the nuclear ban treaty in order to stop this missile that was between these two superpower countries. So the Cuban Missile Crisis, however, that neither the United States nor the Soviet Union were ready to use nuclear weapons because of the fear of others' retaliation and the of mutual atomic annihilation. So these two superpower countries actually knew the fatal result of what they will be doing if they engage in a nuclear fight. So they decided to actually sign a nuclear treaty, a nuclear test ban treaty. Don't forget, I call it a nuclear test ban treaty in 1963. So the two superpowers soon signed the nuclear test ban treaty of 1963, which banned the two parties from nuclear weapon testing in 1963. So throughout the Cold War, the United States and the Soviet Union avoided a direct military confrontation in Europe and engaged in actual combat operations, only to keep allies from defecting to other side or to overthrow them after they've done so. Now, throughout this war, there was nothing like a confrontational war between the United States of America and the Soviet Union. That's why we call it a Cold War. It is not a direct war like that. People will say that, well, they call it war, and they did not, but there was nothing like a direct confrontational war. The war actually existed between their allies, most especially in Europe. Let me say almost every part of the world, because it actually involved African countries too. So this was actually what happened during the Cold War. It wasn't a confrontational war. They avoided a military confrontational war between themselves, and also tried to keep their allies from defecting into other parties. So by 1960 to 1972, the bipolar nature between the Soviet Union and the US gave way to a more complicated pattern of international relationship, in which they would have to be longer split into two blocks. Now, the early part of 1950s and 1960s, many countries started asserting for their independence and also stopped their resistance superpower coercion. Also, more economic growth achieved in the Western Europe. By this time, by 1950 to 1960, a lot of things have actually happened drastically. There were more countries were actually agitating for their independence. More countries were seeking for independence, especially African countries. Now we were seeking for independence because around this time, most of the African countries, or most countries now, they decided to be non-aligned. They never wanted to be part of this alliance, either supporting the United States or supporting the Soviet Union. So these countries were actually not aligned, and they were agitating for their independence. So by 1960 to 1960, it actually saw the beginning, or it saw the existence of most countries, and also it brought an economic development in Western Europe. So in 1970, it saw an easing of Cold War tension as evidenced in the strategic arms limitation talk that led to SALT I and SALT II agreement of 1972 and 1979, in which the two superpower countries set limits on their anti-ballistic missiles and on their strategic missiles capable of destroying or of carrying nuclear weapons. So by 1972 to 1979, there was an agreement that was signed known as SALT I and SALT II agreement, which is known as the Strategic Arms Limitation Talk. That is the full meaning of SALT, Strategic Arms Limitation Talk. Which was signed in order to set limits on their anti-ballistic missiles and also on their strategic missiles capable of carrying nuclear weapons. So this followed a renewed tension in the early 1980s as the two superpower countries continued their massive arms build-up and competed for influence in the Third World. So based on what happened in this place, it started developing more militarily. They started building their arms, and they were competing among the Third World countries in order to bring them under them, in order to have control under them, especially in African countries, because by this time African countries were just gaining their independence, most especially the West African countries. Now, the Cold War began to break down in the latter part of 1980s during the administration of the Soviet leader known as Mikhail Gorbachev. So it dismantled the totalitarian aspect of the Soviet Union and the Soviet system, and began effort to democratize the Soviet political system. Now, there was a drastic change that happened in the latter part of 1980s, where the government of Mikhail Gorbachev, after Joseph Stalin died, a lot of personality came to power, and later it led to Gorbachev, and bringing Gorbachev on board. And by this latter part, Gorbachev dismantled the totalitarian aspect of this system and started democratizing the Soviet political system. So the Soviet bloc's countries of Eastern Europe collapsed in 1989 to 1990, and it led to the rise of democratic government in East Germany, Poland, Hungary, and Czechoslovakia, it led to the democratic government of East Germany, Poland, Hungary, and Czechoslovakia. And also, in this spirit, the unification of West Germany and Eastern Germany was done, and it came under NATO by the Soviet approval. So as these things were going on, things has actually changed. The war were actually reducing, the tensions were reducing, things were actually changing drastically, things were coming down. The war was not like that again, due to the fact that the communist system, the communist system were actually going down. So Gorbachev's internal reforms weakened the Communist Party and allowed power to shift to Russia and other republics of the Soviet Union. So by this Gorbachev action, a lot of things changed. A lot of things changed. The other countries that were under the Soviet Union started having their independence. So in late 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed, and 15 newly independent nations were born, and this was the event that led to the end of the Cold War. So far, we've been able to discuss what the Cold War is. I said that the Cold War was not it was more or less of an ideological war and a rivalry war between the United States and the Soviet Union, and it's a war that was based on political, economic rivalry between these superpower countries, and it was more or less also this military race, or let me say armed war, or let me say armed beef between the two superpower countries. And I said these two parties they so much avoided a confrontational war between themselves in order to cause a massive casualty. So this is the little about the Cold War and how it started, the origin, the struggle between superpower countries, and how it ended. Thank you very much for watching.